This is the third of 3 tutorials that provide guidance on general public licenses for open source software. This tutorial will provide additional information on GPLs. Open source software must include the GPL whenever the code is distributed so that the provisions apply to all recipients. GPLs are generally governed by copyright law and not contract law. The copyright holders of open source are the creators of that software. They have the right to enforce the GPL terms and conditions if they make their software subject to the GPL. If the recipient of GPL licensed software does not accept the GPL's terms and conditions, copyright law prohibits them from copying or distributing the GPL licensed software or derivative works of it. The interesting twist is that if such a recipient does not redistribute the software that is subject to the GPL, they are permitted to still use the software inside their organization, and undistributed new software created by the use of the original software does not have to be covered by this license. The derivative work aspect of this means that an organization can make a modified version of the open source and use it internally without ever releasing it outside the organization. But if the developer of the modification releases it to the public in some way, the GPL requires that the modified source code is made available to all users. Another aspect of applying copyright law is the open source community's use of the term copyleft. Although open source is copyrighted, those rights are used in the GPL to ensure every user has the freedoms championed by the open source community, instead of using the legal power of copyright to restrict users like the publishers of proprietary software do. A key component of the copyleft concept and open source is its impact on derivative works. Copyright ownership typically includes the right to make derivative works. Proprietary companies use the copyright to restrict licensees from creating and using derivative works. Open source uses the control over derivative works to ensure that all open source derivative works can only be distributed under the same GPL license terms. Another important issue with open source is the impact of combining it with proprietary software. This is a very complex topic, therefore, this tutorial will provide only a very high-level view. The most important thing to understand is that generally speaking, the GPL contemplates that the licensed open source can be used in conjunction with proprietary software, but will not be combined with that software. The example of working in conjunction with software would be an open source operating system working with a proprietary commercial logistics application. If users want to combine open source with proprietary software, it is recommended they use something called the Lesser General Public License, known as the LGPL. Using the Lesser GPL permits use of the open source library in combination with proprietary programs. Using the standard GPL for an open source library makes that library available only for other free programs. Another important aspect of open source is whether it is free in the commercial sense of the word, meaning it has no cost or price. The GPL allows anyone to sell copies of open source as a part of its definition of free or unrestricted software. The flip side of this permission is that others can use or distribute open source without being compelled to pay for it or to charge for it. So while one person or company can charge you to get a copy from them, they can't require you to pay them if you get a copy from someone else. Since the GPL requires that everyone is free to use or distribute the open source, it is highly possible to get a no-charge copy from someone. In conclusion, GPLs provide a set of terms and conditions for anyone who wants to use open source. It helps proliferate open source and the guiding principles of those who believe software should be available to everyone without restrictions on use, modification, and distribution. More in-depth information on open source software and general public licenses can be found on the ESI website, including white papers, video tutorials, and the EULA Best Practices training course. Thank you for viewing this tutorial. Please visit the DoD ESI website for more information and other videos in this series.